Stop wasting your time on Etsy. Statistics and especially graphs lie to you or mislead you, not necessarily lie to you. And I'm going to go into that today. Okay, I know we've got to do a video on the share and save on Etsy. I hear you. That is going to be the next video coming up. However, the Etsy staff are going to be answering the Q&As tomorrow on the share and save. So I wanted to get all the details into a video. So I hope that you will forgive me for jumping into a stop wasting your time on Etsy video as a filler in between, because I thought this was really, really important. Yeah, is it Mark Twain quote? Lies, damn lies, and statistics. Statistics lie to you in an extent. I'm going to explain. And this can involve people spending massive amounts on digging into some data that is not as meaningful as they think it is. Now, I am actually, before I did all this, I was an industrial chemist at GlaxoSmithKline, and part of my job involved lots of data, lots of numbers all the time. I know how you can massage data to make it look the way you want it to look, and I know how to deal with vast amounts of data. And generally, it isn't digging up every single little point. But I have been tagged a load of times on this graph that's come up. And I'm not dissing this graph. It's from a company I've just heard of. Not dissing this. I'm just saying that people are reading into this too much. So I want to explain that and explain why they're reading into it too much. So, as I say, I've been tagged on this a whole load of times. It's a graph, sales on Etsy by category, March 23 to August 23. And the main thing that I've said in several places is we can't read too much into this because there isn't a scale. And I'm going to explain this a little bit. But basically, this is an okay graph. Now, this is details that Etsy doesn't give out to anyone. So it's a tool, like eRank does this, like all the other tools. It's using their own data and their own interpretation of the data to bring you some results. Now, as through the months March to August, what they are classing as each of these categories and everything is the same. It's comparing apples with apples. It isn't necessarily 100% exact to Etsy, but it's enough to give you a comparison. So I'm not saying this is bad data or good data. It's just how we use it that's a thing. And yeah, people are losing their minds over this for numerous reasons. I'm going to say, if you're looking at a graph like this, there is literally only a couple of things that you can take out of this. And it's not bad at all, but basically it's telling us, so all of these dark blue lines are March and it works all the way down to August. And it's telling us in most of the categories that this company was looking at, sales were reasonably okay in March, dropped down a bit over the summer, and was improving a bit in August. Not in every single category, but that's the general trend. We can see this. We know this. We expected this. This happens every year. Like June and July are usually the worst months, basically. April, May, and that for weddings, not too bad. But again, this company has to manipulate the data to figure out their own versions of what the categories are. It's never going to be 100% accurate because Etsy doesn't give out this data, so we pinch of salt it as with any data. The other thing we can say is for their definition of these categories, we can say that on Etsy, now I believe this is shops who are put into these categories by this company have made this number of sales. So we can say shops that are in these categories are a bit high seller than the other ones. So it looks like craft supplies and tools, home and living, paper and party supplies, art and collectibles, and potentially jewelry and clothing. Those are kind of the big things on Etsy according to the way that this company shows that data. No bad thing at all. That is all you can say. Now, as I say, my complaint was we can't look into anything more on this because there's no scale. And people argued with me and said there is a scale. There's not a scale. We'll get into all of this in a minute. But I cannot look at this and say bags and purses, craft and supplies and tools is, what's that, about 10 times bigger than bags and purses. I can't say, is this one sale and that 20 sales? Is that 1 million sales and that 20 million? You can't read anything other into it. So literally, if you're looking at the data on a graph like this, your look should be, kind of goes down in the middle of the summer. Most things seem to recover. Interesting. And yeah, some of these categories are a bit bigger than others. That is all. That's it. That's it done. I've looked at that chart and gone, interesting data. We can't dig any further into it. Now, the company has the numbers they can tell us, percentages and all sorts of things. There may be reasons they can't tell us the exact numbers. That's absolutely fine. But this is not a particularly exciting graph. I don't think it was ever meant to be. It's part of a blog post by this company. It's part of a lot of data. It's cool, but I don't know why people I'm getting tagged on this in so many places. Not entirely sure why. Anyway, so let me explain. If you're saying, but no, there's so much more interesting things. It's how graphs and charts and everything can be shown. Now, this is not, I get, look, I'm going to try not to nerd out too much. I get. The thing is, most people are not interested in this kind of thing, but those of us who've had a lot of experience in this forget that most people are not kind of used to this thing, apart from like politicians and media who are well aware that the general public don't necessarily understand the nuances of this and are able to produce charts to manipulate people. Now, I'm not saying this company's doing this. As I say, this was just one part of a blog post, but I just want to explain why that's all we can read into it. So now this is just a random set of numbers that I created. It means nothing. Right. But this is what we expect when we see a chart like what we've just seen, or any chart. It's a linear scale starting at 0. So all that means here on the y-axis is it starts at 0. The bottom of the graph is 0, whatever units this is, which would be sales in the last case, but it starts at 0, and each little step of a certain distance is the same amount. So each line here goes up by 200 units. It's made up. I have no idea what the numbers mean. They don't mean anything. It's just something I randomly put down. But each division here is the same size. So it's a linear scale. So if a something here, that's about 100, is it? So it's about half of that line. So each 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. It's maybe about 11 times bigger than that. You can look at that and absolutely say that. Now, if you have, I'm going to go back if I can. Yeah. If you have a chart like this that there's no lines here, there's no scale, we don't know if that's what it's saying. So we just assume that it's this type of chart, but it isn't necessarily. Well, let me show you this. These two charts look very different. You would read into it some very different data, but it's the same numbers. So linear scale and a logarithmic scale, a log scale. Now, the point of a log scale is each of these divisions increases in size. So the first division is 10, the second division is 100, third's 1,000, and so on. This is to be able to compare two vastly different data sources. If you're dealing with like huge, unbelievable numbers like light years or something, if you're dealing with Etsy shops that makes tens of thousands of sales a day and one that makes 4 sales a day, you could use a log chart to sort of take these small numbers and bring them up so that you can see them comparatively. But if you don't know that's a log scale, if we were looking at these two different types of numbers, instead of saying that that was 11 times bigger, number 3 compared to number 5, now we would say, number 5's only about 50% bigger. It's not such a big deal. So if you spent too much time over analysing the details here, you're kind of wrong. So if you don't know what the scale is, you don't know. You don't know any more than, on this kind of scale, we can say that 6 is bigger than 1. 6 is bigger than 1. They seem to go up. 1 to 6 get increasingly bigger. That's about all we can say. Don't spend any more time analysing it. You can't say how much bigger they are than each other without knowing what the scale is. So, right, so what I've done here, I've just taken that's the normal data just so you can see it, and this is the log data. I've just moved it up so it's out of the way because I wanted to show you the second data set. Now, if you saw these two graphs, you would assume the numbers were fairly similar. They're not exactly the same because, again, I just did this in 5 minutes, pulling together some numbers. But if you saw these two, you would say they were pretty similar, as opposed to between the linear scale and the log scale. If these are the same numbers, you would say that these data sets were a lot more similar. But they're not. Number 2, we can see, now we're experienced in this, we can look at the scale. It's a linear scale, so each of these divisions is 50 units as opposed to 10, 100, 1,000. So you can see these are not the same at all. These are not comparable. The only things we can compare these two things to say is, 6 is bigger than 1. That's about, 5 is bigger than 2. They go up. That's about it. But as you can see, it's an exponential increase. You just can't see it because of how the data's shown to you. So is there more ways? Is there more ways that we can be manipulated by this? There is indeed. So I've just moved the linear scale number set 2, what we just seen, I've just moved it over to the left. This is the first set of numbers, the log scale, the original set of numbers. This is the second set of numbers. This is a brand new set of completely different numbers, right? And all these three graphs look pretty much the same. If I didn't give you the scale, if I didn't tell you what this axis was, at a brief glance, you would say all of these graphs are showing very, very similar data. But here's a different thing. The axis here, the y-axis, does not start at 0. It starts at 1,000. And again, this isn't to con people like the log scale. This is to be able to zoom in and look at data sets in a different way, to be able to compare big numbers. So if I hope I did the next page, I did. So this is this is big numbers, and the y-axis is starting at 0. That's a linear graph starting at 0. But because the numbers are also big, it's hard to see the difference between them. So it's very normal to start your graph not at 0, but at a higher point. So the axis starts at 1,000, which zooms in on this top portion of the graph. It zooms in on it and lets you see the small differences. However, this is used a lot in the media and with politicians to make it sound, oh, look at how crime figures have got better, or look at how this community's terrible people, or whatever. And what they've done, the data sets are so massive, and they've just zoomed in on that very top portion where the differences actually aren't all that much at all. So again, if you saw this graph, and this graph, you would think it's given you some fairly similar data. but it's really not. You have to look. You need to see the scale here to see that this starts at 1,000. So we are zoomed in. So these two graphs are the same numbers, but the entirety of what we're seeing in this graph is pretty much covered in these two little lines here. So it's just like a zoom in on that. So I just wanted to explain to everybody, if you can't see what the scale is, then you can't take much information out of it at all, apart from this is bigger than the other. You don't know how much, you don't know if it's statistically significant. I mean, if this was in the millions, that little amount of variation added to a million, it's a fraction of a percent. So yeah, it's less significantly important, basically, than this number said. So I hope that shows you that 3 very different types of data, 3 numbers. So actually, yeah, I should have shown this better, but the actual raw numbers in the type of graph that you're expecting, which is a linear graph starting at 0. So that's a linear graph starting at 0, that's a linear graph starting at 0, and that little thing there is a linear graph starting at 0. So you can see, if you can see that tiny one, you can see these 3 graphs have vastly different data, really. If you looked at them, if you looked at this tiny one, and then you looked at this big one, then you wouldn't read different things into the data that you're seeing there. But you can set these graphs up. I didn't change any of the numbers. The numbers are all the same. I just took the graphs and changed that y-axis. I changed the scale, and the graphs all look very similar. I'm quite proud of myself that I made them look so similar. But I hope that makes sense. Like, don't read too much into graphs. They're not lying to you, but they're lying to you. So with a graph, that's why I just look and go, yeah, pretty graph. That's what that tells you, and get on with your day. I hope that kind of makes sense. Try not to nerd out too much. I love data. But anyway, yeah. So don't spend too much time on graphs. They're not lying to you, but they're not telling you the truth. It's just nice. You look at it, you look for 3 seconds and go, oh, that's going up. Oh, that's going down. And get on with your day. Paralysis by overanalysis is a thing. You can get so stuck in the weeds you don't get anything done. It doesn't need you to spend all that much time. You just go, yeah, that's getting higher. Great. I hope that helps. Random video, I know, but I felt I had to do this. Let me know if it was useful. You already knew it. You're bored witless. Who knows, right?